I'd love to start today's conversation talking about Marketo, which is such an iconic company in the world of SaaS. Can you talk a little bit about kind of like the state of Marketo when you first joined?
Sure. And yes, I agree. One of the all-time iconic brands, I think, in SaaS. It was such a privilege to have the opportunity to join. My only regret is I wish I had been there earlier in the journey and had probably an even longer stint there. So I joined Marketo as a mid-market sales leader when they were still a public company, so pre-Vista acquisition, but obviously very much a mature business at that point. Marketo had opened an HQ or an East Coast HQ where they were running part of the commercial business out of Atlanta, which is where I live. So I was the first round of hires that joined to lead a team in Atlanta.
Very cool. And then what's mid-market sales look like at Marketo? Like what was that sale like at the time? Who were you selling into? Can you kind of take us behind the scenes of what it was like at the time?
Sure. Well, it changed a little bit during the time that I was there because I went through the whole Vista ride until the Adobe acquisition. So there was a couple of iterations. When I joined, they did have a true SMB motion that we didn't touch, but basically everything from about 25 million in revenue up to 500 million was our cutoff. That's how we defined mid-market. In terms of who we were selling to, obviously marketers within those organizations. It was still very, very inbound heavy. We were working hard to build a more structured outbound motion because Marketo, like many of the early marketing automation days, had grown up very much in this. They kind of created the world of inbound, and then their sales organizations were birthed out of that. So we were about 25% outbound when I joined, and we got that up to about 35% in the 2.5, 3 years that I was there.
And what was it like? Like you mentioned these different like stages of Marketo, like going through the Vista acquisition and then ultimately the Adobe acquisition. Like, can you take us maybe starting with like the private equity turn into Vista? Like, what is that like? What is that like for you sort of personally going through something like that?
So I don't have anything to compare it to because this is the only PE ride that I've ever been a part of. I was at Pardot much earlier in my career as a rep, and then I went through the Salesforce acquisition there. So obviously that was quite different or a very different type of experience. I learned a lot going through the Vista ride. There was clearly a number of inefficiencies that they identified and lots of reasons that they felt like they could, optimize and improve some of the fundamentals of the business, which I think they very much were able to do. Even just in terms of how we looked at renewals and who owned what for a retention and expansion, where we split off the net new versus the expansion motion, all of those things. Vista's got a pretty clear playbook, or at least they did at the time. This was quite some time ago, but a pretty clear playbook in terms of how they optimize those things. They also introduced some really impressive frameworks around outbound motion from an AE perspective, sales leadership. So I was a frontline sales leader, morphed into a second line leader towards the end of my time there. Really, really clear playbooks and expectations in terms of what great looks like. Down to the details of here's exactly how you run a forecast call. Here's if you're on a monthly cadence, here's what you roll up week 1, week 3, week 4. Here's what it looks like. Here's what the notes need to be structured as. So it helped to add a lot of predictability. And obviously, I'd worked at some great companies before that, but this was certainly the most kind of rigor in terms of just commercial rigor that I had experienced. So tons of positive learnings there.
Super interesting. So it's really that tactical because I've never been through a PE acquisition, but it was literally like, these are the notes you should do on a forecast call. Because I always think of it as like, all right, PE comes in, all right, like let's fire these people. Let's, get some efficiency over here. But it was really like super tactical go-to-market advice.
At least for us and the experience in the commercial business, it was incredibly tactical. And that just points to part of the fact that Marketo had been a bit of the wild, wild west, been growing really, really fast, a victim of its own success in certain ways. And so they clearly saw opportunities to create more structure and predictability. Even just in terms of how we looked at lead flow, how we carved territories, who did what was considered inbound versus outbound, all of those things. I don't know if it's part of their standard playbook, but they just certainly had an opinion on those things. And I think made us a much tighter, cleaner business as a result.
Super interesting. And even on the first example you gave around the renewals, what did they say to do? Was it separated out from a customer success person to like an account manager role, like add a more salesy person?
Yeah, they built out a whole renewal coordinator role, a team that was also based out of Atlanta during the season that I was there. And it was literally just high volume SMB to mid-market renewals, and that was their entire job. So they were very focused on how do we eliminate inefficiencies. So where an AE might be spending unnecessary amounts of time on paperwork or documentation, same thing on the CS side, like looking at things that have the ability to be more scalable or automated.
And who's actually doing it? Is it just like a Vista associate or somebody comes in and starts sitting in meetings and doing stuff? Or is it, yeah.
We could probably unpack like 60 minutes on nothing
Yeah.
but Vista. But I feel like I'm so far removed from it that I'm going to get some of the details wrong. But yeah, they definitely, I mean, there was a team. There was a team that they brought in. And again, I was kind of at a mid-level manager, so I wasn't like an executive running massive organizations at the time. So I was exposed to some, but not in all of the conversations. But yes, there is a team that is tasked with some very clear deliverables along the way and come in and roll out the playbooks.
Yeah, so interesting. I've
They've got a whole team of
yeah.
trainers as well. So like we went through as sales reps and then people managers as well, went through some pretty detailed training in terms of kind of there was a whole phased approach over the first 12 months where we learned a lot and we're expected to implement things pretty quickly.